Hey everyone! With the PTS up and running, I was eager to log in and try out the flagship feature that will debut with the release of the High Isle chapter, the infamous Tales of Tribute card game. Now, I say infamous because the announcement of this card game has caused quite the commotion within the ESO community. I myself have been a little skeptical over this new content, as a player that's more interested in the implementation of your traditional MMO updates, such as new PvP content or new skill lines. Despite the fact that this card game doesn't really align itself with my personal interests when it comes to playing an MMO, I've kept an open mind and have tried to remain optimistic. Don't knock it till you try it, right? I initially wasn't a fan of the antiquity system that debuted in Greymoor, but over time I soon came to enjoy it for what it was. Another casual activity to pass the time on ESO and collect valuable mythic items or make a bit of gold while doing so. That's not so horrible, is it? On the topic of personal bias, I figured it would be worthwhile to mention my own experiences with strategy card games, as that may very well influence how I perceive Tales of Tribute and shape this review. If you'd like to get right to the instructions on how to play this game or my review of it, I'll leave timestamps in the description for convenience. Alright, so my experience with strategy or trading card games is that I don't actually have any at all, unless playing Go Fish counts. I do, however, have ample experience playing tabletop strategy games. These kinds of games actually have a special place in my heart because of their association with some fond childhood memories. On Sundays, after my brother and I would return home from our swimming lessons and change into dry clothes, my father would make a snack and we would all gather around the dining room table and enjoy some yummy food while playing a board game. Well, we started off playing games that were more heavily influenced by RNG, like Monopoly. We would outgrow them as we aged and gravitate towards board games that required more strategy and critical thinking, like Risk, Catan, Small World, Puerto Rico, Carcassonne, and many others. Even now, when I visit my family for the holidays and whatnot, we still make an effort to play a board game together. While not exactly the same thing, I think it's fair to say that someone who enjoys these kinds of games could potentially also enjoy a strategy card game, no? My opponent in this footage is a good friend of mine, Drakar Snow. Drakar, unlike myself, is a trading card game enjoyer. He's played a plethora of TCGs, ranging from Pokemon to Yu-Gi-Oh! To Hearthstone, Magic the Gathering, and even Elder Scrolls Legends when that was a thing. What a nerd! Despite being a card game Andy, Drakar adamantly voiced his skepticism regarding Tales of Tribute because he believed that it strayed too far from the traditional strategies that made card games successful in the past. His initial impression of the game upon watching the live reveal of it on Twitch was that Tales of Tribute appeared to take a lot of aspects from traditional card games and mix them together, while at the same time changing things up to be different for the sake of being different. He elaborated by suggesting that although these varying aspects of the game are recognizable to a TCG enjoyer, they don't necessarily seem appealing when incorporated in the manner that the devs have chosen, as their integration doesn't appear to make sense. I was curious to see if his mind would change after we played a few matches. Speaking of, I'd say it's high time we actually delve into the Tales of Tribute mechanics. Alright, so let's start off by talking about the different aspects of the board, so that you can get acquainted with the board, and some of the terminology that's associated with TOT. Yes, I'm gonna use TOT as an acronym, and there's nothing you can do to stop me. This here is the tavern. As you play the game, you'll be able to acquire cards from the tavern when it's your turn. Anytime a tavern card is acquired, a card from the tavern deck over here will be drawn, and it'll take its place, so that there are always 5 available cards in the tavern. These cards here are the ones in your hand. You can play these when it's your turn. To the left of your hand is your draw pile or a deck. You'll be drawing cards from here when it's the start of your turn, and if ever you use a card during your turn, that lets you draw a card from this pile. This spot on your right here is where you play your cards. Once you play cards during your turn, they'll be placed here and you can't take them back if you decide you didn't want to play them. So make sure you're making the best decision when you play your cards. Order really matters, and we'll get into why later. This spot here on your far right is your cooldown pile. At the end of your turn, played cards will get added to your cooldown pile. Once you've gone through your entire deck, your cooldown pile will be shuffled and then placed back over here and become part of your deck again. Way over here on the right are the patrons. These patrons are associated with decks. At the start of each game of Tot, you and your opponent get to pick 2 decks each. So if I pick the Duke of Crows deck, that means I'll be adding the Duke of Crows deck of cards into the game for the 2 of us to use. And the Duke will be a patron that can potentially be interacted with for the duration of the game to win their favor. We'll discuss what this means later. The Treasury is always a patron in every game, but you can't win its favor. Patrons are generally only interacted with once per turn. Around the middle here, you'll notice 3 little shapes. The yellow circle on the left indicates how much gold you have available to use during your turn. You can utilize this gold to purchase cards from the tavern, among other things. The red parallelogram on the right is an indication of the power that you've earned during your turn. There are certain cards that you can play that earn you gold and/or power. At the end of your turn, your leftover gold gets discarded, and any power that you have accrued gets converted into prestige, which is kept track of in this blue hexagon. Some cards can give you immediate prestige when played as well. And right below these shapes is the field. When you play an agent card, it'll go here until it's knocked out in one way or another. Cool. Now we know what everything on the board is, but what do all these cards do, and what are patrons? Let me explain. There are a handful of different kinds of cards in this game. When you and your opponent pick decks at the start of the match, the cards from these decks will populate the tavern deck as well as your own decks. The simplest cards that you can receive, no matter what decks are chosen, include gold coin cards. You can play these cards during your turn to earn gold, which can then be used to purchase cards from the tavern. If ever you have at least 2 gold available at the end of your turn and you have 1 gold coin card in your played cards pile because you used one during your turn, you can interact with the treasury and destroy that gold coin card or any other shitty card that you played that turn that you don't think you'll have much use for, in return for a writ of coin card. This writ of coin card will then chill in your cooldown pile. So now, when this card eventually gets recycled back into your deck and subsequently your hand, it's worth 2 gold. I'd highly recommend destroying crappy cards in order to receive writ of coin cards if you can, to get the most out of your cards, especially in the early game. The cards that are available from the decks are as follows. When you play an action card during your turn, it'll get sent to your played cards pile, and then eventually your cooldown pile at the end of your turn. Both gold cards are action cards, for example, since when you play them, you receive gold. When you play an agent card during your turn, it'll chill here on the field until it's defeated in one way or another. It can be defeated if your opponent plays a card that knocks it out of the field, or if they accrue enough power to kick it out. The amount of power that your opponent needs to defeat your agent is imprinted on the card itself via the health stat. You can also get rid of your agent on your own accord, such as by sacrificing it to a patron. A contract card of any kind is a card that, when acquired, gets played right away and does not ever go into your own cooldown pile. This means that they can never be added to your own personal deck. Instead, they get tossed into the tavern's discard. These cards are used as soon as they're acquired. These cards get placed on the field as soon as they're acquired and operate the same way a normal agent does. However, when these agents are knocked out, instead of returning to your discard pile, they get removed from the game. You may interact with a patron typically once per turn, unless you have some play condition that allows you to interact with the patrons twice, such as an action card with this condition. Patrons have 3 states. They may either be neutral, not favoring you, or favoring you. Depending on the relationship that you have with the patron, you'll have to offer up different resources in order to gain its favor. So long as you meet their requirements, you may interact with them. There are different reasons why you may want to gain favor with the patrons, depending on what they grant you anytime you interact with them. I may interact with the Crow patron if ever I have a boatload of gold at my disposal, so as to convert it to prestige, for example. Or maybe I want to interact with a favored Sorcerer King Orgnum so that I may collect more valuable cards for easy prestige. After both players pick their patron decks, the game commences. To win a game of Tot, you have to receive 40 or more prestige, or win the favor of all of the patrons. How you go about achieving one of those win conditions is ultimately up to you. It's worth noting that when a player reaches 40 or more prestige, their opponent will have one last turn to try to surpass or tie that amount of prestige to stay in the game. If the opponent fails to do so, then the other player wins. If the opponent does manage to receive enough prestige to tie with or surpass the other player, then the game continues. And now, the other player has one turn to try to surpass their opponent, and so on and so forth. That's why you may see games with scores well above 40 prestige. If a player achieves a patron win, with all 4 patrons favoring them at once, that is considered an instant dub, and the game ends there. There are a lot of strategies when it comes to playing TOT that I'm not going to explain here, otherwise this video would never end. Plus, true 5-head strategies would take some time to develop. I'll link some great resources in the description that showcase all of the cards, as well as some strategies and things to keep in mind while you play. I will, however, quickly go over 2 notions that you should consider as you play to help you be more successful in TOT. Firstly, it's important to thin out your deck whenever you can. You'll want to be able to get rid of weaker cards so as to line up powerful combos to gain more power, gold, and prestige. Doing things such as converting singular coins into rid of coin cards, or using cards that can help you discard cards into your cooldown pile, or even permanently remove them from the game can help you in this regard. Secondly, you just heard me mention the term combos, right? Certain cards that belong in the same deck when played in a certain specific order can be comboed to receive bonus gold, power, prestige, or other effects, such as forcing your opponent to discard one card into their cooldown pile at the start of their turn, or acquiring a card from the tavern for free up to a certain specified amount of gold. Landing really sweet combos is what will get you ahead in the game, and there are things that you can do to encourage this possibility, such as purchasing cards from the tavern that belong to decks that you're trying to make combos from, or thinning out your deck in one way or another, so that you're more likely to be served the cards that you need. Some decks seem to operate more as support decks that allow you to manipulate the cards that you receive in an attempt to land a combo, so it's important to not entirely dismiss any one particular deck altogether. Definitely be sure to make use of the patrons as well. And that's it. A really basic rundown on how to play this game. Now, of course, the footage is all taken from the first week of the High Isle PTS, so I suppose some components of the game could very well be subject to change, but I'd be willing to wager that a vast majority of what I've mentioned here will remain relevant, as I've been quite general with my explanations. Now let's close up this video with my final thoughts on Tales of Tribute. I've spent the last 5 days playing this card game for the better half of each day. I've mostly played against Drakkar, but I've played against some NPCs and random players that have dueled me as well. Is there a chance that I may acquire a new perspective or a sense of appreciation for this card game sometime in the future, once I've gotten a chance to play it even more? Yeah, absolutely. The strategies that I've acquired for the board games that I used to play all the time were ones that I developed over years of playing them. So I can see how time could influence my aptitude and likewise my perspective of the game, but I still have a lot of thoughts about Tales of Tribute as it is. First and foremost, I'm still honestly a bit disappointed that this was the flagship feature for an ESO chapter. I would have much preferred it if this was the new gameplay feature for a Quarter 4 DLC. Or perhaps a gameplay feature that accompanied some other game-changing addition to the Elder Scrolls Online. While I absolutely adore the new zone and can see myself spending a lot of time on the sun-kissed shores of the Sisters Archipelago, I find that the new features offered in this chapter pale in comparison to those introduced in chapters such as Somerset, Morrowind, and elsewhere. Elements such as jewelry crafting, the introduction of the Warden and Necromancer classes, or new skill lines in PvP zones profoundly affected and forever changed the way a vast majority of players play ESO. To me, this notion is integral to ESO chapters. I question whether this card game will have the same effect. I understand that it isn't entirely feasible to implement new skill lines into the game because of the limited memory of old generation consoles. I also understand, as a Battlegrounds Andy myself, that the performance when it comes to PvP in this game has definitely deteriorated over the years. So it wouldn't be entirely wise to continue to build on top of an already compromised foundation. I understand why the devs can't really add more PvP content or new skills to the game at this moment. At the same time, I can see why the implementation of this card game can be a turnoff to players that are craving new, profoundly game-changing content that builds off of beloved systems that are already in the game, such as combat or build crafting. The defining features of these past 3 years of ESO chapters have been more casual in nature, so I understand why players that don't prefer to play casual casually have expressed their frustration. I personally enjoy partaking in just about every aspect of gameplay that ESO has to offer, but even I have felt starved for something new and fresh and challenging that changes and refreshes the way that I play the game. At the time of recording, there are a few quirks with the game that stand out. Some decks seem to be much more strong than others, such that if you play against NPCs, even the NPCs will spam cards and patrons from these cracked decks. I'm looking at you, Marimer deck. Other decks, like the Sijic deck, seem to be more late-game decks, but because of how easy it is for a match to snowball, or for an opponent to just suddenly score something like 30 prestige in one turn, you may never even get the chance to build up your Sijic deck to support your strategy before your opponent has rolled you.
The crows come out of nowhere, bro. 70? Okay. Okay. Let me just act like I'm doing something. Fucking bobhead Sijics don't do shit, bro.
It makes me wonder if these cards will be subject to change with each patch, much like how our skills are. I'm also not too fond of how strong of a grasp RNG has on the outcome of a game of Tot. I had some matches where neither myself nor Drakkar was getting any reasonable combination of cards, and so our games would drag on quite a bit and take a while to really get off the ground. Other times, just one of us would get dealt some repeatedly shitty RNG, while the other got really lucky and was able to actually start employing some strategy to earn prestige with ease. This made for some pretty stale gameplay at times. I like how in Catan, even receiving bad RNG could be a blessing or used to your advantage if you had built a strategy to counter this notion, such as if you had an aqueduct. So if ever a number was rolled that did not correspond to any of your plots of land, you could still pick any resource card you'd like. Any Catan enjoyers? I wish that the luck of the draw wasn't such a prominent notion in this game, or that there were more strategies to combat bad RNG. But as Drakkar informs me, this is pretty standard of card games. Guess it comes down to my personal preference. I also found the UI to be pretty clunky to navigate at times. Both Drakkar and I would occasionally make mistakes and click on the wrong card because of ever so slight movements of the mouse. Something like enabling keyboard shortcuts or the possibility to confirm prominent actions, like sacrificing cards or ending your turn, much like the confirmation windows that we receive when upgrading or deconstructing items, would be much appreciated. That, or perhaps adjust the sensitivity of interacting with cards. Or maybe it's just a skill issue, I don't know. Probably is. The game also lacks pizzazz, in my opinion. Interacting with a patron's pretty cool, the sound design for that is pretty neat, but everything else feels a little underwhelming. I think it would be neat if things like placing a combo, or placing down agents, or knocking agents down, or using really expensive cards came with neat accompanying visual or audio effects to keep players engaged and hyped while playing. Like, take a look at this footage from Elder Scrolls Legends that Drakkar sent me. This looks much more appealing to me, but at the same time, I can see how aesthetics are totally a matter of preference. Despite my initial disappointment and the minute gameplay quirks, Tales of Tribute isn't a colossal L in my books, far from it. A lot of casual activities in this game are essentially meant to be done by yourself. Farming nodes, crafting, decorating, putting together an outfit, scrying and excavating antiquities, these things are all solo activities. You do all of these things alone. The companions were developed to further aid players that prefer to play alone but require a hand when it comes to defeating enemies. What's refreshing about Tales of Tribute is that it deviates from this pattern of solo gameplay. It's a more casual activity that can be played with others, with friends even. I could see how guilds could put together Tales of Tribute social events, and for those that are interested in playing more competitively, there'll be ranked games and leaderboards to look forward to. While this game may not scratch the itch I've had for more PvP content, it's satisfied my desire to have more options for social activities in the game. The prizes that you can receive from winning matches are also a very nice touch. I don't foresee that playing Tot games will serve as a means to replace material farming, if anyone was wondering, as it isn't very time efficient. But the reward coffers are a nice little bonus for those that plan on playing the card game anyways. You can even get expensive dragon materials from these reward coffers, and transmutes. Drakkar didn't think that Tot was as bad as he thought it was going to be either, although he insists that it still pales in comparison to many of the other card games that he plays. But I suppose you could argue that that's to be expected, as ESO is not a card game first and foremost, it merely has a card game that you can play in it. Personally, I don't see myself integrating Tales of Tribute into my daily ESO routine. There are a handful of other activities that I would much rather partake in if I have the time to play. That being said, I can definitely see myself setting aside the time to continue to play a match or two with my best friend on a weekly basis. Kinda like how I used to with board games when I was younger and still lived with my family. It's been nice to just chat over a Discord voice call, have some tea or a snack, and play a casual game with ties to the Elder Scrolls universe with a friend. For more casual ESO players that enjoy card games, I can really see this being a gratifying experience. It's not the new MMO content that I wanted, but it's the new content that we got. And for what it's worth, it really isn't all that bad. I give TOT 6.9 out of 10. Alright, that's all for this video. I hope you were able to take something away from it, whether that's a basic understanding of how to play Tales of Tribute, or an opinion on it to help you decide if purchasing the High Isle chapter is the right move for you. What do you guys think about this card game? Have you had a chance to play it yourself on the PTS? Or take a look at some of the TOT gameplay streamed on Twitch? I'd be interested to hear your thoughts in the comments. But please, if I have to read any super original comments that go along the lines of "Silence, role player, card game bad," my last 2 brain cells are going to leave the establishment. I'd like to take a moment to thank my YouTube members for sponsoring this content. By becoming a member, you help pay for my editing software and likewise my ability to improve my editing skills. I always try to teach myself at least one new editing trick every time I create a video so that I can continue to produce better quality content. You also get some nice perks like the use of emojis and a custom role in my Discord server. Thank you to everyone for watching. If you'd like to join my community, I'll leave a Discord link to it in the description. Alright, I'll see you all in the next video. Cheers!